I really love your work. It's very generic and mediocre. Today I'm going to be talking about illustration style or art style in general, and why it's important to have an art style, but also why it's important that you don't worry too much about it, especially if you're just starting in illustration. But the reason that it's important to have a style is because it helps set you apart from other people, obviously. It helps make your work instantly recognizable. For instance, if people are scrolling through Instagram and they come across a piece of your work and they're familiar with you, they should be able to tell that that's your work without even looking at your username. And also having the illustration style is hugely beneficial in a marketing sense. When you're starting out in art, it can kind of feel overwhelming because there seems like there's so many artists out there and so many illustrators, and there are. It doesn't just seem like that there actually are so many artists out there that it's really hard to come up with something that's totally fresh, some new style that no one's ever seen before. And in reality, you're probably not going to do that. Your style's going to end up being some type of a combination of people that you admire. And so there's nothing wrong with that. The thing you don't want to do, though, is pick one person and then just copy that one person's style. You want your style to be kind of like a culmination of everything that influences you in your life. And you're unique. You're the only you. And so you're the only person in the world that has the exact influences that you have. And what I mean by that is you have all the very specific artists that you like, the musicians you like, you have friends that influence you, acquaintances, workmates, you were raised by your own family. And so all of these things influence the person you are and ultimately influence your art, and there's nobody else like you. And so, you don't have to, if you're trying to come up with an art style and you're taking pieces from, tons of different artists that you love, and you're kind of putting it all together and also the way that you naturally draw, and you're combining all those things, it's probably not, you're not going to have to worry too much that it's too similar to someone else's. And the fact is, your work is going to be similar to other people's work. That's just how it is. And so you don't want to be overly concerned with that, but you also don't want to be straight up just ripping one artist off. And I know I'm going to be straight up honest. Like, when I first started doing illustration in school a few years back, I was really obsessed with a handful of artists. And because of that, my work, it was all right, but it was like, you could tell the artists that I was really fond of, and I've found that the more that I've expanded the people that I enjoy looking at their art and my favorite artists, the more my work has improved and has grown into something where the influences, there's definitely, you can still see that I have influences from people, but I'm becoming more of my own artist, and that's just a natural progression that everyone is going to have. It just takes time, and you have to be okay with that. A lot of times in art, you hear people talking about like pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and experimenting, and those things are good, but I find I might be totally wrong with this is just my opinion, but for like your art style, I kind of feel like you don't want to be way outside of your comfort zone. This is the style you're going to be working in all the time. You want to kind of find where you're really comfortable working and sit right in the middle of that. Not to say you can't experiment with your work and push yourself out at times, but overall your style really should be something you're comfortable doing. So I wanted to talk about some things that you should think about before you develop your style. And of course, there's a lot of you out there that are already developing a style or have a style that's pretty developed and you're still kind of working on it, and that's fine, but still take a minute to think about these things. The first thing you want to think about is what do you want to do with your illustration? Is it that do you want to do children's books? Do you want to do editorial work? Do you want to do advertising? Because that really does make a difference in what type of style you might want to do. If you're interested in doing children's books instead of editorial, then you may want to consider who's really popular in children's books right now. Go out and buy some of the most popular children's books and look through them and look at the art and see what's tying this art together. You know, find maybe the 5 top selling children's book illustrators right now. Look at all their work, maybe make notes, figure out what's the similarities of these and what's maybe different about each of them. And in that way, you're really figuring out what the art directors that are working in the children's book industry are looking for. And that can help you add those aspects to your work. Not change your style totally to match that. I'm saying just add it into your work in some ways. And it will help you become more successful in the field that you're looking to enter into, or to get more work in if you're already broken into it. So another thing you can think about is also your limitations, and what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. For me, I know I'm not great with wet mediums, but I really love working with pencil and charcoal and dry mediums, and so my style lends itself to that. And so everyone has their limitations, everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and your style should probably play to your strengths and hide your weaknesses. Not to say you're not going to work on your weaknesses, obviously, but you shouldn't have a style that you're really struggling with all the time because it plays on your weaknesses. That would be ridiculous and a bad idea. For instance, if you're not the most accurate at drawing, maybe like a really realistic style is not a great choice for you. Or if you hate working with colors, children's books probably not a great way to go. So you have to think about what you like, what your weaknesses, what your strengths are, and kind of play into those things. So another thing I wanted to talk about is testing out mediums, which kind of plays into what I was talking about before. But you really want to try out as many different mediums as you can, because some mediums that you've never tried might end up being something you really love, and you can work it into your style in some way. I know I'm really fond of trying out mediums because I do almost all my work is mixed medium, and there's a lot of illustrators that aren't like that. There's some that generally just work only in watercolor or only in pen and ink, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's maybe their strength. But I prefer really experimenting with different mediums and trying to incorporate them, and I even use some watercolor and wet mediums, even though it's not my strength. I use it in a very limited sense. So I've already touched on this a little bit, but I do want to talk about how other artists play into this and how they influence your work, because everyone is really a culmination of the artists they love, and they take bits and pieces from them and they mix them together into their own style. Even your favorite artist has tons of influences that they've brought into their own work. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think the best thing to do, though, is to have as many influences as possible. The more influences you have, the less likely it is that people are going to be able to pick out who your influences are. And so I think that you really want to just expand your knowledge of illustration or art or whatever you're doing, and find as many people as you love as possible to try to incorporate their techniques into your work. So another thing that really needs to go into your work is just think about how you draw when there's absolutely no pressure, when you're just drawing in your sketchbook for the fun of it. You don't plan on showing this to anyone, because that is really the real you. The real artist inside of you is how you draw in those circumstances, and so that needs to be a very big part of your work. And so you need to figure out how you can combine your influences with who you are. And it's maybe a tricky process, and it's going to take time, but I think it's important to bring a lot of yourself into your work, obviously. I mean, that should go without saying. And I think a lot of people you look in their sketchbooks and the way they draw is very different from their style, and I think that's strange. I think you should be able to tell an artist's sketches almost when you look at them too. Like, oh, I know that person's finished work, and their sketches, you can tell it's them. I think that should go without saying. Lastly, I wanted to talk about something that I've heard people say, that having a style it feels constraining in some ways, because People like to experiment with their art, and they feel like if they're always keeping the same color palettes and the same techniques and using the same mediums, they don't get to really experiment, and they feel like they're just kind of locked in a box. And I get what you're saying, but everybody that has an illustration style evolves over time, and they add things to their style and to their repertoire, and so that's natural. And of course, having a style doesn't mean you can't experiment and try out new things, but you have to keep who you are within your art, so that even when you're experimenting, people can still see that it's you. Especially if you're doing work for like a client or something, you don't want to just give them something that is like they weren't expecting at all. Well, I hired you because I've seen your work, I really love your work, and now you're handing me this and it looks nothing like anything I've seen. They're not going to be happy. So in some ways, it makes sense, like you feel constrained. But you have tons of time when you're not working for clients, when you can really just experiment and do what you want. So take advantage of that, and don't worry so much. And then if in your experimenting you come up with things that you really love doing, then start adding them to your portfolio so people can see them. And then when they hire you, and you can work them in, because they've seen that, and they're not going to be totally shocked and surprised when you turn in work that looks like what they've already seen. And so don't feel too constrained by having a style. So those are just like some of the things I wanted to talk about as far as like having an art style or an illustration style. I know there's like so much more I could talk about how I develop my style. I think the most important thing is just to continue learning, continue growing. Your style's going to change. It's going to evolve because your influences evolve. If your style doesn't change and doesn't evolve, then it probably means you're not really evolving as a person, and you should be. So it's okay to do that, and for your style to keep progressing. And even people that have been illustrating for 30, 40, 50 years, their style's still evolving, and they'll tell you they're still learning every day. So don't feel like, oh, I've been in the industry for 5 years or 1 year and I need to have a style like down pat immediately. It's not the end of the world. You just want to be working towards something that ties your work together. That's what the main thing is. As far as the statement I said at the very beginning of the video, where I said, I really like your work, it's generic or it's mediocre. That's why you want to have a style. Like, nobody wants their work to be viewed as generic, and so having a style will help you never have to hear those words. Not that I don't think anybody would say them to your face, but with the way the internet is, you could see that in a comment, and that would really hurt. Anyway, so that wraps it up for today. Thanks for watching. If you have any comments or questions or anything, leave them in the comments section, and I'll see you guys soon.